Welcome to the College Neuro Network, a podcast series part of Simply Neuroscience's The Synapse. My name is Sarah.
And my name is Sasha, and we're your hosts for today. The College Neuro Network has discussions with undergraduate students studying neuroscience and neuroscience professors in order to gain insight into the neuroscience departments and opportunities of the nation's top universities.
Today's episode is focused on Yale University, a private Ivy League research university in New Haven, Connecticut. With its hundreds of study, research, and internship opportunities, passionate student body, and diverse curriculum, Yale ranks number 3 in national universities by the U.S. News and World Report.
Today, joining us is Professor Levy, an associate professor of comparative medicine, neuroscience, and psychology at Yale University. Welcome, Professor Levy. Thank you so much for joining us today to discuss your experiences as a professor at Yale.
Thank you so much. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So our first question for you is, can you please briefly introduce yourself and tell us kind of what sparked your interest in neuroscience, psychology, and even comparative medicine?
So I do research on decision making in humans. I started from a very different place. I was a physics major in college, and I loved it, but I realized that I wanted to do something that is more directly related to humans, to people. And I got interested in the brain and went to do a PhD in computational neuroscience at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I did my thesis at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel, focusing on the visual system, the visual cortex. I also loved that, but I wanted to move on from there to things that are more related to behavior, not just perception. And that's when I did a postdoc at NYU with Paul Glimcher. Learned a lot about economics, behavioral science, and then moved to Yale, where I am today, where I have a faculty position at the School of Medicine. And so my lab is studying decision making, especially under uncertainty, both in the healthy brain and in individuals with mental illness of different types. We are very interested both in the basic science questions. We really want to understand, how the brain solves all of these difficult challenges that it faces. But we're also interested in how such research might be relevant, might be helpful for clinical purposes. And as you mentioned, I'm affiliated with 3 departments. That's one thing about Yale, that it's very, very integrative and collaborative. People from many departments work together. My primary appointment is in comparative medicine, but then because my research field is neuroscience, I also have a secondary appointment in the departments of neuroscience and psychology.
That's so interesting. I mean, we've talked to a couple of people at this point for this podcast series, some professors and undergraduates, and it's so cool to see there's so many different ways people have gotten into neuroscience. It's really interesting to see. And our next question is, what does your kind of day-to-day life as an associate professor at Yale look like? What are some of your responsibilities?
So the main thing is supervising, mentoring trainees in the lab, postdocs and graduate students. And we usually also have several undergraduate students who come from various majors at Yale: psychology, neurobiology, cognitive science, economics even. And so a lot of the work is working with these people, designing studies, thinking about the research questions that we're interested in and how we can design a behavioral experiment and then a neuroimaging experiment to answer these questions. So we use functional MRI and some other neuroimaging techniques. We also use some physiological measures like eye movement tracking and skin conductance responses. And of course, behavior is very, very important in our field. So we spend a lot of time thinking about what is the behavior that we can elicit in the lab and will be representative of actual behavior in the real world. So this is one thing. Then the other thing is data collection. So this is something that I currently don't do myself. People in the lab do it. We have a lab manager who manages that. But of course, I have to supervise it. So we collect data, not right now during the pandemic, unfortunately, but normally we collect data from people who come to the lab to do behavioral experiments and who come to the imaging center at Yale. And then maybe the largest part of our work is data analysis. So a lot of the research, especially with neuroimaging, but in neuroscience in general, has become very, very computational, requires high-level analysis techniques. So a lot of our time and effort is put into learning new techniques. So as a lab, we have lab meetings and other meetings where we learn new methods, teach each other. The students teach me now more than I teach them, especially in these high-level techniques. Things have advanced a lot since I was a student. So we keep learning all the time. And a lot of the work focuses on data analysis. Other than that, of course, there is teaching. At the School of Medicine, we don't teach as much frontal teaching in classes as in the School of Arts and Sciences, but it's still an important part. It's something that I really like. So, for example, I teach an undergraduate course in neuroeconomics, which focuses on trying to understand how to study the neural basis of decision-making and decision-making in general. These are the main two things, research and teaching. And then we're trying to do more outreach work, which is part of the reason why I was so interested in the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely incredible. And everything you do sounds very collaborative. And like Sarah said, we did talk to a couple Yale professors before this, and they mentioned the exact same thing about how collaborative the environment is. And it's also really cool to hear you say that you learn a lot from your students as well. And I think that dynamic is very interesting to have learning from both sides. And kind of our next question for you is moving more towards talking about Yale, the university specifically. So we wanted to ask you what drew you to becoming a professor at this institution.
So there are a lot of great things about Yale. You've mentioned already the collaborative nature. There are wonderful colleagues. I think that's the most important thing is the people. These are just people that I like working with. So that's the main thing. There are wonderful resources. So you can do a lot of things relatively easily. There are both physical resources and also human resources. So when you're interested in doing something new, there is usually someone who is an expert and can help you, and people are happy to help. The students are wonderful. So it's really fun, both with the college and the graduate students. It's a really nurturing environment, and I really like it. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a very important feature in a college when like high school students are looking for universities to go to, is that kind of atmosphere that you get when going to that university. And kind of our next question for you is what you think sets Yale's neuroscience and psychology department different from other universities?
That's always a difficult question, and I'm not sure how, it's one thing is that there is a lot of diversity in research fields, in research topics, and it's becoming strong, I think, in many aspects. It was always very strong in like molecular and cellular aspects, and now it's very strong in cognitive neuroscience as Yale as well. There are many new recruits as well as more senior faculty members who do a lot of really interesting work that includes very different fields of neuroscience. And so there are the diversity, and then there's also one thing that, or two things that are, I think, are really great at Yale are the programs. So the graduate program, the INP, the Interdepartmental Neuroscience Program, is great because it encompasses faculty members from around the university. So more than 100 faculty members from many different departments, backgrounds, expertise, so neuroscience, psychiatry, psychology, comparative medicine, pharmacology, molecular biology, physics, computer science. So really a lot of many different individuals, and the students that get into this program are also very, very diverse. So that's one program. And then the other program is relatively new, which is the neuroscience major, which is also doing really well, and also includes a lot of faculty from many different departments.
Yeah, that's incredible to hear because neuroscience, right, is so interdisciplinary already. So to have so many people from so many different expertises and backgrounds teaching it just sounds like the perfect atmosphere to learn neuroscience in. And you kind of touched on this already a little bit, how much you love the people at Yale, but we were wondering if you could elaborate more on what your favorite thing about teaching at Yale is.
So one thing is the enthusiasm. Students really want to learn and come with a lot of curiosity and initiative. People do a lot of different things and are very enthusiastic about their work and their research and their studying. There is also opportunity to do a lot of things. So for example, when I wanted to teach a course in neuroeconomics, I went to the Department of Economics and asked them if, maybe economic students will be interested, and they were interested. And so we have a lot of this, exactly like you said, this interdisciplinary nature of things. Another thing here is the seminars. So not just, formal teaching, but having the opportunity to listen to a lot of great people who come from all over the country and the world, and then the ability to form collaborations with a lot of people and students. So it's great when students come to the lab, from very different backgrounds. We had an economist in the lab, we had clinical psychologists, cognitive psychologists, of course, neuroscientists, and they all bring their own unique aspects, unique perspectives.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. And I think that's like a perfect segue to the next question, where we wanted to talk a little bit more about specific classes at Yale. So like, are they more seminar based? And especially in the neuroscience major, are they more lecture discussion based? Like kind of what does the structure look like in that major?
So there are various courses. There are several that are mandatory, and then there is a lot of freedom to select courses and seminars. So some are more lecture, some are more seminar based. Students are encouraged to take computational, computer science, statistics courses. I think that was something that has made the major strong. This is something that is really important for psychology and neuroscience students, to have this ability to use high-level statistics and programming and computational analysis, things that are now kind of essential to use in neuroscience. And so all of those exist. So I think each student builds their own program. They have an advisor from the neuroscience major who helps them select the courses and decide what to do exactly. And there is a lot of variety that they can choose from.
Got it. And we also talked to Dr. John Crystal before this, and he was also stressing how important computational neuroscience is, especially for new neuro majors. So that's like incredible to hear the opportunities available at Yale for neuroscience majors. And then kind of on to our next question, you talked a little bit about neuroeconomics as a class you teach. So we wanted to ask you what your favorite class you've taught like at Yale is.
Yeah, so that's my favorite class that I teach, but I also, because this is the main class that I direct, and I really like teaching it, and I had wonderful neuroscience graduate students TAing this course. They did a tremendous job, but also I give talks in courses that other people direct. And there are some really great graduate courses. For example, the Principles of Neuroscience course, which is one of the core courses for the neuroscience in graduate program. is really great because you get to hear from professors in different fields. And I think it changes sometimes from year to year who exactly gives the talks. So it's very diverse and very interesting. And there is a similar course now as part of the neuroscience track in the psychology graduate program, which is also, I think really interesting for students. In general, all of these courses, not courses that I teach, but courses that have this diversity of ideas in them, I think are really great.
Yeah, and I keep bringing up previous speakers, but I think we talked to an undergraduate student from Yale. His name was Mitchell Ostrow, and he said his favorite class was the Intro to Neuroscience class because of how many professors he got to meet and how many speakers he got to hear from. So that sounds like an incredible class to be in as a neuro major.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk a little bit more about your research, which you touched upon briefly, that focuses largely on neural mechanisms underlying decision-making in humans. So we were hoping that you could tell us maybe what your most exciting or favorite research experience was.
That's a great question. Most exciting. Everything is so exciting, so it's hard to choose. I think what's exciting to me is when we have something that is kind of tantalizing, like we have a sense that maybe we are onto something, but we're not exactly sure. And then we kind of have maybe a moment where we understand what it could be and what might be the interesting angle of what we're looking at. So we study decision making under uncertainty, and this is kind of it's hard to understand sometimes, or it's hard to put in words the questions that we're asking. We all know what uncertainty is, right? In a way, we all face uncertainty all the time. Many of us have issues with uncertainty. So that's something that I feel is like very fundamental in everything that we do. But it's hard to kind of take that into the laboratory and say, okay, this is what we're going to study now, and this is what we're going to design and do in the laboratory that will be similar to real life. So a big part of the excitement is coming up with the questions or how to do it, and then with figuring out something. So for example, we had a study where we looked at how the value of rewards and punishments is encoded in the brain. So when we expect different things, some uncertain things that might happen. We might get a shock, electric shock, but we might get some monetary reward, or we might see a pleasant picture. And looking at how the brain represents these things, and we know from a lot of research that there are specific brain areas that are heavily involved in these kind of things. But we saw, for example, in one study that you actually see some signals of value of rewards and punishments all over the brain, not just in these very traditional areas of value, but even in the visual system or the auditory system and so on. So this was a very exciting moment, thinking that what we know about how the brain is organized might be slightly different than what we've been thinking.
That sounds like such a fascinating, like decision-making under uncertainty. That sounds like such a fascinating thing to research. That's really exciting. And our next question is where do you kind of want to see your research go in the future? Is there anything you want to study specifically?
Yeah, so one thing that we're very, very interested in, and we have some projects going in that direction, is we're trying to understand how decision-making and learning go together. So how our ability to learn from experience, to learn from things that happen to us, to learn from feedback that we get, how does that relate, or whether it relates to how we make decisions? So, for example, if you have the ability to learn very quickly and to reduce uncertainty, is it something that helps you to then make decisions under uncertainty? Are you more willing to accept uncertainty? Things like that. So these are two kind of research directions that are largely separate in the field, learning and decision making, and we are very interested in putting these two together. The other thing that we're interested in and trying to go in that direction is doing things that are more natural and more ecological in nature. So a lot of the research that we've done so far uses very highly controlled paradigms. So this is great for some reasons. You can do it in the lab and you can really tease apart different factors that affect the decision making, and you can tell, what exactly is changing, what is exactly is different between different individuals. But the downside is that it's very different from real life decision making. So, for example, I have a graduate, a postdoc in the lab now who's working on designing something that will be more ecological, more similar to experiences that we have in real life. And that's very challenging, very tricky. People have been doing that in various fields, but it's tricky because you need to somehow be able to still define the research question, get the information that you need out of the data without making the paradigm and the research situation very artificial and unnatural. So that's the goal, really.
Yeah, I don't know. This sounds like such an interesting research topic to me personally, so it's so cool to hear about it. And our next question is, in your experience, how accessible are research opportunities for undergraduate students at Yale?
Very accessible. So both for Yale students, as I said, from different majors and departments, who can basically just contact PIs, and in my lab we always have several undergrads, and in many labs around us there are always undergrads, and so there's a lot the undergrads can do, and also for undergrads from other institutions. So we've had, during the summer, we usually have undergraduate students from other institutions. Some come through official programs at Yale, but some just contact the PI directly. They say, I want to come for a month or 2 or 3. This is what I'm interested in. This is what I'm interested in your work, and can I come? And often PIs take students, and students go to the lab and do research. So we've had a lot of those.
Yeah, I know for a lot of high school students, like for me personally, having like access to a lot of research opportunities is really important when looking into a college. So it's really great to hear that there's so many opportunities available at Yale.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And so our last question for you is, we wanted to ask if you had any advice for high school students listening who want to apply to Yale and study neuroscience or psychology.
I think my advice in general, not just for those who want to apply to Yale, is, go by your gut feeling and go by what you're interested in and what you love and what makes you happy, not what you think, you should be doing. And so varied experiences can help. Well, I'm not on the admission committee to Yale, so to be honest, I don't know how the admission works for the college, but I think just in general, the wider and the more varied experience that you can have, and the more it's really something that you like, the better, because you're going to spend a lot of time studying, learning, doing research, and college is really the time to try different things and be open to different things. Even graduate school, I always tell prospective graduate students that I certainly don't expect them to know the minute they get into grad school, or even before when they apply. I don't expect them to know exactly what they want to do, what their research question will be, what their research will look like. They have to know what make them happy, what they're passionate about, what they're enthusiastic about. But then things can change a lot. People come sometime thinking that they'll do cognitive neuroscience, and then they realize that actually molecular research is what they need to do, and vice versa. And it goes in many directions. So maybe the main advice would be to just keep your mind open as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's really grounding to hear, because I know a lot of high school students like might feel pressured to like take on one field when they go to college. And like you said, college is really a time to explore new interests and to really just pursue what you're enthusiastic about. So I think that's really important as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
So that wraps up our questions for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us for the College Neuro Network. Your responses were really insightful and will definitely help high school students listening who are researching colleges and interested in majoring or minoring in neuroscience.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.